3 carriers, 1 message. And Iran just heard it loud and clear. Just minutes ago, the United States Navy confirmed the deployment of a 3rd aircraft carrier strike group moving into position near Iranian waters, and the shockwaves from that decision are already reshaping the military calculus across the entire Middle East. The world is watching as America assembles the most concentrated display of naval firepower positioned against a single nation since the height of the Cold War. 3 carrier strike groups, hundreds of aircraft, thousands of missiles, tens of thousands of sailors, pilots, and Marines converging on a region already stretched to the breaking point. But here is the question that every intelligence analyst, every military commander, and every government on Earth is asking right now in urgent closed-door sessions. Is this a warning, or is this a countdown? The deployment order came through official Pentagon channels, but was confirmed with an unusual degree of public visibility. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, already operating in the broader Central Command area of responsibility, was joined by the USS Harry S. Truman Strike Group, repositioned from the Mediterranean. And now the 3rd, the USS Carl Vinson Strike Group, has received orders to transit toward the region, closing what had been the final gap in a naval encirclement that military planners have quietly referred to in classified documents as a full-spectrum pressure architecture. Each carrier operates as the centerpiece of a battle group that extends its combat power across an enormous radius. Guided missile cruisers, destroyer escorts armed with Tomahawk cruise missiles capable of reaching targets deep inside Iranian territory, submarine elements operating beneath the surface in positions that will never be publicly disclosed, and the carriers themselves, each hosting an air wing of over 60 aircraft, including F-18 Super Hornets capable of precision strike missions, EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft designed to suppress and blind Iranian air defense networks, and E-2D Hawkeye command and control aircraft that extend the battle group's sensor reach far beyond the horizon. 3 of these formations, operating in coordinated positions around Iran's maritime perimeter, represent a strike capacity that dwarfs anything Iran's military has ever been designed to confront. This is where things get serious. To understand why 3 carriers near Iran carries a weight that goes far beyond symbolic deterrence, you need to understand the geography of Iranian vulnerability and the specific threat that this naval arrangement poses to Tehran's strategic calculations. Iran's military doctrine has been built around the assumption that its most dangerous adversary, the United States, would never commit to the kind of sustained military campaign that 3 carrier groups make possible. Iranian strategy relies on asymmetric deterrence, closing the Strait of Hormuz with fast attack boats and anti-ship missiles, activating proxy forces across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen to raise the cost of engagement, threatening Gulf state oil infrastructure to make American allies pressure Washington toward restraint. All of these deterrence mechanisms were calibrated against a single carrier presence or a limited strike package. 3 carriers change the math completely. 3 coordinated carrier strike groups operating simultaneously can execute strike missions on a scale and at a pace that overwhelms Iran's ability to respond, reconstitute, and counter. Iranian air defense systems, while improved significantly over the past decade, are not designed to handle simultaneous multi-axis attacks from 3 separate naval formations supported by land-based air power from American bases in Qatar, Bahrain, and the broader Gulf region. The specific targets that such a combined force could hold at risk simultaneously read like a comprehensive map of Iranian national power. The Fordow nuclear enrichment facility, buried deep underground in the mountains near Qom, the Natanz centrifuge complex, the Iraq heavy water reactor, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Command Headquarters, ballistic missile production facilities, air defense radar networks, naval bases at Bandar Abbas, Bushehr, and along the Gulf Coast, communication infrastructure, fuel storage and logistics nodes. A 3-carrier operation doesn't just strike Iran, it dismantles it, and Tehran understands that with perfect, terrifying clarity. The sequence of naval movements that brought America to this point unfolded over weeks, each step calibrated to carry a specific message while maintaining deniability about ultimate intent. The first carrier presence was characterized publicly as routine force posture, standard Central Command operational deployment. Nothing extraordinary. The kind of presence the U.S. Navy maintains continuously across global waters. The addition of the 2nd carrier, repositioned from the Mediterranean with notable public visibility rather than the quiet redeployment that routine movements involve, elevated the signal. Pentagon officials, speaking to journalists with careful deliberateness, described the move as a response to increased threat indicators from Iranian-backed forces. The language was measured, but the message was directional. The 3rd carrier removes all ambiguity. There is no operational routine that requires 3 carrier strike groups in the same regional theater simultaneously. The logistics alone, the fuel requirements, the coordination demands, the communication architecture needed to manage 3 battle groups operating in proximity, all of it represents an extraordinary commitment of resources that does not happen without a decision made at the highest levels of American military and political leadership. The decision was made. The orders were issued, the ships are moving, and in Tehran, military commanders are doing precisely what their American counterparts anticipated, running the same calculations, reaching the same conclusions, and facing the same impossible choice between posturing that risks miscalculation and capitulation that destroys deterrence credibility. The two narratives surrounding this deployment are being constructed with the precision of strategic communication operations on both sides. Washington's public framing emphasizes defensive intent and proportional response to Iranian provocations. Officials point to a pattern of Iranian-backed attacks against American assets, threats to commercial shipping, and accelerating nuclear program milestones as justification for elevated force posture. The message to domestic audiences and international partners is consistent. America is not seeking war. America is preventing it by demonstrating that the cost of Iranian aggression has become prohibitive. The diplomatic language is careful, measured, and designed to preserve off-ramps. State Department officials have simultaneously increased back-channel communication with Iranian counterparts through third-party intermediaries, specifically Oman, which has historically served as the quiet conduit for U.S.-Iran diplomatic contact. The military posture and the diplomatic outreach are two hands of the same strategy, the carrier groups applying pressure while the back channels offer the possibility of release. Iran's counter-narrative, amplified through state media and the broader network of aligned regional voices, frames the deployment as evidence of American aggression and imperial overreach. Iranian military commanders have appeared on state television delivering statements about Iran's readiness and its asymmetric capabilities. The language about closing the Strait of Hormuz has returned to Iranian official discourse after a period of relative quiet. Iranian proxy forces across the region have signaled elevated alert status. Hezbollah commanders in Lebanon have made public statements. Houthi forces in Yemen resumed threatening postures toward Red Sea shipping lanes. Iranian-backed militia leadership in Iraq issued warnings about American bases. The message from Tehran is that Iran does not stand alone, and that any American military action would ignite a regional conflict across multiple simultaneous fronts. But here's what most people don't know. The third carrier deployment was not triggered by a single provocation or a straightforward escalation in Iranian behavior. According to intelligence sources with access to the planning discussions, the decision was catalyzed by a specific piece of intelligence that crossed the desks of senior American military planners approximately 10 days before the public deployment order. That intelligence indicated that Iran had crossed a nuclear threshold that American Red Line architects had identified years earlier as the trigger for a fundamental shift in American posture, not a completed weapon. Something more ambiguous but equally alarming. A technical milestone that shortened the timeline from potential decision to operational capability to a window that American planners concluded could no longer be managed through diplomatic pressure alone. The carriers are not responding to yesterday's provocation. They are positioning for a decision that may already have been made about tomorrow, and what happened next changed everything. Within hours of the third carrier's deployment becoming publicly confirmed, Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei convened an emergency session of the Supreme National Security Council. Iranian state media made no mention of the meeting, but signals intelligence intercepts, fragments of which have reached Western media through careful sourcing, suggest the session was characterized by acute disagreement between factions within Iranian leadership about how to respond. One faction, centered around IRGC hardliners, pushed for immediate activation of asymmetric response options, closing exercises in the Strait, missile tests visible to American satellite surveillance, activation of proxy forces to demonstrate the regional cost of American escalation. Another faction, aware of the catastrophic economic and military consequences of open confrontation with a three-carrier formation, argued for strategic patience, nuclear acceleration, and diplomatic outreach through channels that might offer a face-saving resolution. The outcome of that internal debate will determine the next phase of this crisis. The global reaction has been seismic and immediate across every dimension. Oil markets lurched violently. Brent crude surged past $115 per barrel before partially retreating as traders attempted to price the difference between pressure campaign and active conflict. The Strait of Hormuz premium returned to energy pricing models that had partially relaxed in recent months. Gulf state sovereign wealth funds activated defensive positioning in their portfolios. American allies in the Gulf region, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Qatar, each hosting American military infrastructure critical to any operational scenario, received urgent diplomatic consultations from Washington. The conversations involved reassurance about American intent, requests for continued basing access, and quiet discussions about what each government would and would not publicly support. The responses were revealing. Gulf states uniformly expressed support for American deterrence efforts while privately conveying anxiety about the economic consequences of regional conflict. Saudi Arabia in particular, having invested enormously in an economic diversification program whose success depends on regional stability, communicated a preference for maximum diplomatic pressure with military positioning maintained as leverage rather than utilized as kinetic force. European allies issued the standard calls for dialogue and restraint while quietly activating their own contingency planning for energy supply disruption scenarios. Germany accelerated discussions about LNG terminal capacity. France repositioned naval assets in the Mediterranean with ambiguous public justification. Britain placed RAF strike assets at higher readiness. Russia and China coordinated their public responses with notable speed, issuing a joint statement condemning what they characterized as American military intimidation and calling for immediate diplomatic resolution. The statement was significant not for its content, which was predictable, but for the speed and coordination of its delivery. Moscow and Beijing are watching this crisis with the focused attention of powers that understand a weakened or distracted America serves their strategic interests, and a Middle Eastern explosion that engulfs American military resources serves them even more directly. Social media platforms have become a real-time intelligence commons. Commercial satellite imagery companies have posted enhanced resolution images of carrier positions. Military aviation communities are tracking aircraft transponder data and identifying support movements. Think tank analysts are publishing real-time threat assessments. The public is watching a potential war unfold across multiple platforms simultaneously, generating a level of popular awareness and anxiety that itself becomes a factor in the political decision-making environment. What comes next branches across several paths, each carrying its own momentum and its own dangers. The maximum pressure scenario, the one American planners most prefer, involves the three-carrier posture combined with intensified diplomatic back-channel engagement, producing a negotiating framework that allows Iran to step back from its most dangerous nuclear activities in exchange for partial sanctions relief and an implicit American commitment to non-military resolution. This scenario has precedent. It resembles the framework that produced the 2015 nuclear agreement, though the current environment is significantly more hostile than that moment. The escalation spiral scenario begins with an Iranian miscalculation, a fast boat that moves too aggressively toward a carrier group and is engaged by defensive fire. A missile test timed poorly that is misread as a targeting acquisition. A proxy attack against American forces in Iraq or Syria that produces American casualties and forces a kinetic response. Any of these triggers initiates a sequence of action and reaction that each side believes it can control, and that history suggests no one ever fully controls. The military strike scenario, the one that the carrier deployment most visibly threatens, involves a decision made in Washington that diplomacy has been exhausted and the nuclear timeline has compressed beyond the point where further patience is strategically acceptable. In this scenario, the three carrier groups represent not a threat but an operational reality. The first strikes are not warnings. They are the beginning of a campaign designed to set Iran's nuclear program back by years and reshape the regional balance of power permanently. Each scenario is possible. None is inevitable, and the space between them is filled with human decisions that will be made under pressure with incomplete information by people whose judgment will shape the world for generations. The bigger picture demands that we step back from the Persian Gulf and see this deployment within the arc of the largest geopolitical competition of our era. America's willingness to deploy three carriers simultaneously reflects more than a response to Iranian behavior. It reflects a calculation about global credibility at a moment when that credibility is under challenge on multiple fronts. A United States that allows Iran to cross nuclear thresholds without visible response loses deterrence value not just in the Middle East but in the Pacific, where China watches American resolve with direct interest in Taiwan's fate. In Europe, where Russia evaluates American commitment to NATO with every decision Washington makes about force deployment. In every region where American security guarantees form the architecture of Allied defense planning, maintaining credibility is not separable from the specific decisions made in the Persian Gulf. They are the same calculation. At the same time, the costs of military action are not abstractions. A regional war triggered by strikes on Iran would disrupt energy markets in ways that reverberate through the global economy for years. It would activate proxy conflicts across multiple theaters simultaneously. It would consume American military and financial resources at a moment when those resources are simultaneously committed to European security and Indo-Pacific competition. It would potentially accelerate precisely the Russian-Chinese-Iranian alignment that American strategy has identified as its most dangerous long-term threat. The three carriers are simultaneously a demonstration of American power and a reminder of American constraints. Maximum leverage exists at the moment before it is exercised. The moment the missiles fly, a new and less controllable reality begins. Iranian leaders understand this. American planners understand this. And the entire world watches this understanding play out in real time across the waters of the Persian Gulf. Look at this moment honestly, and you see something that should disturb anyone who believes the world operates according to rational calculation. Three of the most powerful weapons platforms ever constructed by human civilization are converging on a relatively small body of water, each carrying enough destructive capability to end a medium-sized nation's modern infrastructure in days. They move according to orders issued by human beings operating under political pressures, intelligence assessments that are always incomplete, and strategic frameworks built on assumptions about adversary behavior that may or may not reflect reality. The system that governs these movements, the chain of command, the rules of engagement, the communication protocols designed to prevent accidents, was built by human beings and is operated by human beings. And human beings, across the entire sweep of recorded history, have demonstrated a consistent and humbling inability to prevent the wars they are trying to avoid. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest. 3 carrier strike groups are positioning around a nation of 90 million people, whose leadership has spent 40 years telling itself and its population that survival requires resistance to external pressure. The gap between deterrence and disaster has never felt narrower. Tonight, in the waters between the Arabian Peninsula and the Iranian coast, engines hum. Radar sweeps the horizon. Fighter pilots sit at readiness. Missile crews monitor their systems. And somewhere in the chain of events that brought 3 American carriers to these waters, a decision is waiting. The carriers send a message, but messages require recipients willing to receive them on the sender's terms. And in 40 years of confrontation, Iran has never yet responded to American pressure exactly the way Washington intended. The sea is calm. The ships are in position, and the next move belongs to a moment that no one in any capital can fully predict or control. That is the most unsettling truth of all.